Pedro Guerrero, a 1,988 NLCS hero who delivers a .300 average with 23 home runs and 91 RBI that season, carries the profile of a player whose postseason reliability defines his legacy for more than a decade. His performance anchors the Dodgers lineup during a period when the club relies heavily on middle-order production, and his reputation as an instinctive hitter grows because his strikeout rate remains below league average in multiple seasons. After retiring in the early 1,990s, he maintains a public image tied to that playoff run, so his sudden connection to federal investigators in 1999 shocks both fans and former teammates. Prosecutors allege that Guerrero participates in a cocaine distribution conspiracy, arguing that recorded phone calls capture his logistical role in an attempted transaction. Because the case emerges years after his final plate appearance, the contrast between his statistical consistency and the allegations becomes a focal point of media coverage. The transition from certified postseason contributor to federal defendant forms a blueprint for the broader theme of post-career dissent. The legal proceedings intensify when the federal sting operation releases transcripts of taped conversations that prosecutors claim establish his knowledge of the drug exchange, even though Guerrero insists he misunderstood the coded language used by the informants. In court, he repeatedly states that he thought it was baseball stuff, a phrase that becomes a shorthand for his defense strategy and a frequent headline in national coverage. The oddness of that line echoes long after the trial. Jurors ultimately acquit him after determining that the prosecution fails to prove intent beyond a reasonable doubt, but the verdict does not restore the public trust he loses over months of reporting. Guerrero's endorsements vanish, charitable appearances decline, and alumni invitations slow, because organizations hesitate to attach themselves to someone whose name remains linked to narcotics trafficking. The gap between legal absolution and cultural rehabilitation grows wider with each passing year, reflecting how off-field allegations can overshadow even signature postseason moments. This shift from October hero to embattled retiree frames the question that drives the next case. What patterns repeat when fame collides with personal decisions under public scrutiny? Dwight Gooden, a foundational New York Mets starter who records a 24-4 season with a 1.53 ERA in 1985, reaches statistical heights that place him among the most efficient young pitchers in modern MLB history. His strikeout rate surpasses 8.7 per 9 innings that year, and his walk rate drops below 3, so analysts treat his Cy Young season as evidence that the franchise finally stabilizes its rotation after years of volatility. Because his workload exceeds 276 innings during that same campaign, concerns about long-term durability begin circulating even before his age 23 season. Although those concerns appear irrelevant while the Mets continue winning, the first major shift occurs in 1994, when he receives a suspension for cocaine use, removing him from a roster that is already struggling to adjust to the pace of the strike-shortened season. That suspension initiates a documented decline in pitch velocity and command metrics, creating a measurable link between off-field issues and on-field deterioration. His story becomes a case study in how early dominance can quickly erode once substance abuse patterns take root. The second collapse arrives in 2006, when Gooden is arrested in Florida for DUI and fleeing police, an incident that amplifies the behavioral pattern established throughout the previous decade. Court documents show repeated probation violations, therefore judges escalate penalties, and Gooden publicly states that his personal demons intensify after retirement because the structure of daily baseball no longer anchors his habits, a rare moment of candor that surprises longtime reporters. Meanwhile, the Mets alumni network gradually reduces formal invitations to him, not as a punitive measure, but as a way to protect the organization from renewed negative attention during seasons when attendance and media exposure remain critical revenue drivers. His absence from ceremonies that routinely feature members of the 1,986 championship core underscores how reputational decline can isolate a former star even within his own franchise. The trajectory from Cy Young winner to embattled retiree illustrates how data, discipline, and personal stability intersect and how quickly that equilibrium can break. What happens when the spiral accelerates into financial fraud and open manipulation, as it does in the next case involving Lenny Dykstra? Lenny Dykstra, an outfielder who helps drive the 1,986 New York Mets to a World Series title and later records a career-high 30 stolen bases in 1993 with Philadelphia, establishes himself as a player who relies on contact hitting, high on-base rates, and aggressive base running. His postseason output in 1986 includes a .385 on-base percentage, Therefore, front offices view him as a catalyst who pressures opposing defenses through pace rather than power. After retirement in the early 2000s, he attempts to convert that notoriety into a business resume by promoting investment newsletters and lifestyle brands during years when financial regulation remains comparatively loose. The shift becomes measurable in 2009 when federal prosecutors charge him with bankruptcy fraud, alleging he conceals assets during filings tied to the collapse of his real estate ventures. Bankruptcy records show missing furniture, undervalued vehicles, and altered financial disclosures, so investigators widen the scope of the case to include personal conduct patterns that appear consistent with long-term deception. The contrast between his 1,986 reliability and his 2009 indictments demonstrates how off-field ambition can drift into criminal exposure. The investigation expands when former teammates report that Dykstra uses their identities to apply for credit cards, a pattern confirmed through bank inquiries that track multiple applications filed within short windows under mismatched addresses. Because identity theft qualifies as a separate federal offense, prosecutors add additional counts, thereby increasing potential sentencing ranges and strengthening leverage during plea negotiations. Meanwhile, his Players Club investment advisory service, marketed as a subscription platform that guarantees premium stock tips, faces scrutiny after the Securities and Exchange Commission identifies fabricated performance claims and promotional statements unsupported by market data. The cumulative evidence leads to a federal sentence of 3 years, and court transcripts highlight a repeated refusal to acknowledge the scale of his misconduct. Dykstra's trajectory from World Series contributor to federal inmate shows how unchecked swagger can transform into measurable harm once financial desperation intersects with public recognition. What follows next is a case where exposure does not rely on markets or credit scores, but on published accusations that reshape the steroid era. The story of José Canseco. José Canseco, an outfielder who records 462 career home runs and wins the 1,988 American League MVP award with Oakland, builds his peak seasons on a combination of 4.0 home run power and top-tier hard contact rates that reshape how front offices evaluate corner hitters. His 1,988 campaign includes 42 home runs, 40 stolen bases, and a .569 slugging percentage. Therefore, analysts credit him with accelerating the league-wide shift towards strength-based roster construction. After retiring in the early 2000s, he attempts to reframe his legacy by publishing Juiced in 2005, a book that alleges widespread steroid use across MLB and identifies former teammates as participants in performance-enhancing programs. Because many of those accusations emerged before the sport finalizes its comprehensive testing policy in 2006, his claims dominate congressional hearings and force MLB executives to address oversight gaps that had grown since the mid-1990s. The book becomes a commercial success, yet it isolates Canseco within player-alumni circles and reduces post-retirement opportunities that typically rely on goodwill between former teammates. His transformation into a self-directed whistleblower sets the stage for increasingly erratic behavior. The next phase begins when former teammates report that Canseco privately pressures them for paid appearances, using the threat of additional revelations to secure fees that exceed standard alumni event rates. Because these allegations surface concurrently with declining book sales, observers link the timing to financial strain rather than new evidence, and his reputation for coercive tactics becomes a recurring theme in sports media coverage. The pattern escalates in 2019 when he uses Twitter to post hostile, taunting messages directed at Alex Rodriguez, comments that spark brief investigations by event organizers who assess whether security protocols need adjustments. Meanwhile, Canseco pursues low-tier celebrity boxing exhibitions and televised stunts, most of which end quickly because his conditioning and payout demands do not match production budgets. Each failed appearance widens the gap between his on-field resume and his post-career persona, signaling a shift from public critic to figure of spectacle. His slide from MVP cornerstone to cautionary example introduces the next case, where online disputes give way to broader financial collapse. The unraveling of Curt Schilling's post-retirement ventures. Curt Schilling, a postseason workhorse who earns co-MVP honors in the 2001 World Series and records a 2.23 ERA across 48.1 playoff innings that year, anchors two franchises during eras defined by rising attendance and television revenue. His bloody sock performance in the 2004 ALCS, where he pitches 7 innings with 1 earned run despite a surgically stabilized ankle tendon, becomes one of the most replayed segments of that postseason, therefore elevating his reputation as a data-driven competitor who thrives under maximum leverage. After retiring in 2009, he establishes a video game company called 38 Studios, projecting that its flagship title will generate enough sales to repay a state-backed loan guarantee worth $75 million. Because the studio misses multiple production deadlines during 2010 and 2011, operating expenses rise faster than revenue, and state regulators identify widening financial gaps that threaten solvency. When the company collapses in 2012, thousands of pages of filings reveal unpaid salaries, overdue vendor invoices, and internal warnings that leadership allegedly disregards. The shift from postseason icon to bankrupt entrepreneur reshapes public perception and opens the door to extensive legal scrutiny. The financial fallout generates immediate litigation in Rhode Island, as state officials file civil suits alleging securities fraud and misrepresentation regarding the studio's financial health. Investigators track email chains, budget revisions, and loan application materials to determine whether Schilling and other executives knowingly understated risk exposure during negotiations, therefore escalating the case beyond standard business failure. Meanwhile, Schilling's broadcast career at ESPN deteriorates by 2016 when the network terminates his contract after he posts a series of inflammatory social media messages that conflict with corporate conduct policies. Each incident compounds the previous one, widening the distance between his playing career, built on strikeout efficiency and postseason durability, and the reputation he constructs online. Public backlash intensifies as former teammates distance themselves, and charitable partners reduce affiliations, citing concerns about brand stability. His 10-year slide from World Series hero to polarizing public figure sets up the next transformation, where accusations of performance-enhancing drugs lead directly to congressional testimony. The unraveling of Roger Clemens' post-retirement story. Roger Clemens, a power pitcher who records 354 career wins and secures 7 Cy Young Awards between 1986 and 2004, becomes one of the most decorated starters of the modern era because his strikeout rates consistently exceed league averages, while his workloads remain among the heaviest in baseball. His 1997 season with Toronto includes a 2.05 ERA across 264 innings, therefore front offices view him as a durable ace capable of elevating rotation depth almost immediately after acquisition. The narrative shifts in December 2007 when the Mitchell Report identifies him among several players alleged to have used performance-enhancing substances during the late 1992s and early 2000s. Because the report compiles trainer statements, clubhouse testimony, and shipping records, its release widens a public debate that had already intensified after federal raids tied to Balco and other distribution networks. Clemens responds with categorical denials on national television, creating a collision between statistical accomplishment and the credibility crisis that follows. His legacy begins to hinge less on innings pitched and more on the accuracy of the report's supporting evidence. The conflict escalates in February 2008 when Clemens appears before Congress, where committee members question inconsistencies between his testimony and previous statements from his former trainer, Brian McNamee. McNamee testifies that he administers human growth hormone injections during multiple off-season cycles. Therefore, lawmakers refer Clemens' account to the Justice Department for potential perjury charges. Meanwhile, analysts track how his public defense strategies, ranging from recorded phone calls to pointed press conferences, mirror tactics used in earlier high-profile doping cases, increasing scrutiny rather than reducing it. His 2012 acquittal on all counts resolves the legal component but does not reverse the reputational damage accumulated over 5 years of continuous hearings and filings. Hall of Fame voters respond with declining ballot percentages, citing unresolved doubts about performance enhancement despite the verdict. The gap between dominance and denial widens further as the video shifts to another case where a player's retirement invites a different kind of reputational drift, the unusual business pivot attributed to Julio Franco. John Rocker, an Atlanta Braves closer who records 38 saves with a 2.13 ERA in 1999, emerges as one of the most efficient late-inning relievers during a season when league-wide bullpen usage expands rapidly. His strikeout rate approaches 12 per 9 innings, therefore the Braves deploy him aggressively in high-leverage situations that determine division race margins. That momentum collapses in early 2000 when Sports Illustrated publishes an interview in which Rocker delivers a series of derogatory remarks toward multiple groups, remarks that immediately shift him from statistical asset to organizational liability. Because the comments circulate nationally within hours, MLB Commissioner Bud Selig authorizes a $20,000 fine and a 14-day suspension, citing conduct detrimental to the game during a period when the league attempts to broaden market appeal. Braves executives track sharp declines in regional approval metrics, and several teammates publicly distance themselves, arguing that his statements disrupt clubhouse cohesion. His shift from dominant reliever to cultural flashpoint becomes a template for how rhetoric can override performance. After leaving MLB in the mid-2000s, Rocker transitions into a series of media and radio appearances that align him with extremist commentary, amplifying the backlash that begins during his suspension. Producers book him partly because his notoriety ensures spikes in call-in traffic, but the amplification creates a feedback loop that further separates him from mainstream sports networks. Meanwhile, he begins selling autographs that reference or mock his 2000 discipline, turning the suspension into a marketing device that relies on the very controversy MLB attempted to contain. Because these choices generate renewed coverage, former teammates and league partners continue distancing themselves, and Rocker's public persona becomes anchored to the volatility first triggered by the SI piece. The pattern demonstrates how post-career visibility can harden around a single moment when financial or media incentives reward provocation over reconciliation. That pattern becomes even more severe in the next case, where misconduct moves from public statements to criminal conviction, the downfall of Chad Curtis. Chad Curtis, an outfielder who hits 289 inches, 1,995 and later contributes to 2 World Series championships with the New York Yankees, builds his on-field resume around steady contact rates and plus defensive range during a period when teams increasingly value multi-positional flexibility. His postseason performances, particularly his 2-homer game in the 1999 World Series, reinforce his reputation as a player capable of producing under high-leverage conditions, therefore elevating his standing within veteran clubhouses. After retiring in the early 2000s, he redirects his focus toward volunteer work in Michigan schools, presenting himself as a moral authority who frequently delivers lengthy lectures about discipline, conduct, and personal responsibility. Several former teammates later state that these sermons mirror patterns they observed during his playing days, noting that Curtis often positions himself as an enforcer of rigid behavioral codes. That post-career identity begins to fracture in 2011 when school administrators receive complaints about inappropriate interactions with students. The allegations set the stage for a criminal investigation that moves quickly because of corroborating reports from multiple witnesses. Prosecutors file charges in 2012 after interviews, digital record checks, and school facility logs align with accounts provided by several students, leading to Curtis's conviction on multiple counts of criminal sexual conduct. The sentencing range of 7 to 15 years reflects Michigan guidelines for offenses involving minors and positions his case among the most severe post-retirement criminal outcomes for any recent MLB alumnus. Because he had spent years presenting himself as a mentor, the conviction triggers a wave of statements from former teammates who recall prior warning signs, often describing unsettling locker room lectures or moments when Curtis attempted to police others' behavior despite lacking formal authority. Meanwhile, school districts revise background check procedures, citing the Curtis case as evidence that recognizable former athletes can bypass community skepticism and obtain access to students more easily than typical volunteers. His fall from defensive specialist to incarcerated offender illustrates how a carefully maintained image can collapse once investigative evidence contradicts moral self-presentation. That collapse leads directly into another case where personal instability, substance use, and repeated legal trouble define a player's post-career years. The turbulent story of Willie Aikens.